Don't prepare, don't translate, and don't pause this video. I'm going to give you a simple English challenge, and the way your brain responds in the next few seconds will reveal something far more important than your grammar level. You may know thousands of English words. You may understand movies and conversations. You may even have studied English for years. None of that guarantees you'll pass, because this test begins exactly where memorized English stops working. There's one moment coming where most learners hesitate, and that hesitation changes everything. So forget about being perfect. Trust your English, respond naturally, and keep going. Your first challenge starts now. Chapter 1. The 3-second response test. Your first test begins with one simple rule. When you hear a question, you have only 3 seconds to start answering, not 3 seconds to create a perfect sentence, not 3 seconds to search for impressive vocabulary. You simply need to begin speaking before the time runs out. Ready? First question. What did you do yesterday evening? 3, 2, 1. Answer now. If you started speaking immediately, good. It does not matter whether your answer was simple. I stayed home and watched a movie is enough. What matters here is that you heard the question, understood it, found an idea, and began expressing that idea in English without a long delay. Now try another one. What is something you always carry with you? 3, 2, 1. Speak. Maybe you said, I always carry my phone, or I usually have a bottle of water with me. Again, we are not judging how advanced your sentence sounds. We are testing how quickly English becomes available when you need it. Here comes the next question. If you could change one thing about your daily routine, what would you change? 3, 2, 1. Start answering. This one may feel slightly harder because you need to make a decision before you speak. You cannot simply remember a fact. You have to choose an idea and turn it into language quickly. Now pay attention to what happened during those 3 seconds. Did an answer appear naturally? Or did you first create the answer in your native language and then try to convert it into English? That difference is important. When a real person asks you a question, the conversation does not stop while you build a perfect response in your head. Your speaking system needs to begin working while the conversation is still moving. Let's increase the pressure. You have 3 seconds again. What would you do if you suddenly had an entire day with no responsibilities? 3, 2, 1. Go. Keep speaking even if your first sentence is basic. You can say, I would probably sleep longer, then I would go somewhere peaceful. Maybe I will meet a friend. Notice what you are doing. One sentence creates space for the next sentence. You do not need the complete answer before you begin. Now one final question. What is something you believed when you were younger but no longer believe today? 3, 2, 1. Speak. This question requires more thought, but the rule remains the same. Begin with whatever English is available. If you need 5 or 10 seconds before every answer, that does not mean you do not know English. It means your knowledge may still need extra processing time before it becomes speech. And that gives you your first result. The goal of this test was not speed for the sake of speed. It was to discover whether you can access English directly when someone suddenly expects an answer. If you could begin most responses within 3 seconds, you passed the first challenge. But quick answers are only the beginning. Because in a real conversation, sometimes the problem is not starting your sentence. The problem comes when the exact words you wanted suddenly disappear. And that is where the next test begins. Chapter 2. The Say It Another Way Challenge. You passed the first challenge by getting your English moving quickly. Now we are going to test something different. Can you keep communicating when you are not allowed to depend on the first sentence that comes into your mind? Here is your first statement. I'm very tired today. Say it once. Now express exactly the same idea without using the words very or tired. Go. You might say, I don't have much energy today. You could say, I feel exhausted, or even, I really need some rest. Different words, same message. That ability is extremely useful because real conversations rarely follow the sentences you prepared in advance. Sometimes you know exactly what you want to communicate, but one important word refuses to appear. If your speaking depends on finding that single word, everything can suddenly stop. Flexible speakers take another route. Let's test that flexibility. Here is the next sentence. The movie was really interesting. Now say the same thing without using movie, really, or interesting. Think quickly and speak. Perhaps you said, I enjoyed watching it from beginning to end. Maybe you said, the story kept my attention the whole time. Notice what happened. Instead of replacing one word with a synonym, you changed the structure of the message. That is exactly what we want. Now let's make it harder. Your original idea is, I disagree with him. But this time you cannot use disagree, wrong, or opinion. How would you communicate the same meaning? Try it now. You could say, I see the situation differently, or I understand his point, but I don't see it the same way. This is where English starts becoming more adaptable. You are no longer searching for one correct sentence. You are discovering that the same thought can travel through several different language paths. Here is another challenge. The restaurant was too expensive. Now explain that idea without using restaurant, expensive, price, or money. Go. You might say, the place where we ate cost much more than I expected, or I enjoyed the meal, but I wouldn't pay that much again. If that felt difficult, pay attention to why. You probably understood the original sentence immediately. The challenge was rebuilding its meaning from another direction. Let's try one final round. Your sentence is, I was nervous before the interview. Now communicate that idea without using nervous, interview, worried, or scared. Start. Before I went in to speak with them about the job, I couldn't relax. That works. Your sentence does not need to be elegant. It needs to carry the meaning successfully. So here is your result. If you could reformulate most of these ideas without getting completely stuck, your English has flexibility. If removing one familiar word made the entire message collapse, you have discovered an important skill to train. But now we are going further. Until this point, I will give you the original sentence first. You already knew exactly what needed to be communicated. In the next challenge, I am taking that advantage away. You will know what you want to describe, but the most obvious word will be completely forbidden. Chapter 3. The Missing Word Survival Test. Now we remove one of the biggest comforts you have when speaking English, the exact word you want. In this challenge, I will give you something familiar to describe, but you are not allowed to say its name. Your job is to make the meaning clear using whatever English remains available. Let's begin with an easy one. Describe an umbrella without saying umbrella. Start speaking. You could say, it is something you carry when it rains. You hold it above your head and it keeps you dry. That is enough. You communicated successfully without the obvious word. Now try this. Describe a refrigerator without saying refrigerator, fridge, or cold. Go. You said, it is a large appliance in the kitchen where we keep food and drinks so they stay fresh longer. Good. You found another route to the meaning. This skill becomes important because vocabulary does not always arrive when you ask for it. You may know a word perfectly when reading or listening, yet suddenly forget it while speaking. At that moment, you have two choices: stop the conversation and search your memory, or explain the idea using language you can already access. Let's make the test more difficult. Imagine you are traveling and need a charger, but you cannot remember the word charger. You are standing inside a shop. Explain what you need. Speak now. You might say, I need the thing that connects my phone to electricity so I can give the battery power. The sentence is not perfect, but the shop assistant would probably understand you. Communication succeeded. Next situation. You are speaking to a doctor and suddenly forget the word dizzy. How could you explain what you are feeling without using that word? Try. You could say, when I stand up, I feel like everything around me is moving and I need to sit down. Notice that this time you explained an experience rather than an object. That requires you to focus on symptoms, actions, and sensations. Now another challenge. You cannot remember the word appointment, but you need to tell someone that you have one tomorrow morning. Explain it. Maybe, tomorrow morning, I have time to meet someone. That works. You did not need the missing word because you still had access to the meaning behind it. Now for the hardest round. Imagine you are telling a friend about someone who is generous, but that word has completely disappeared from your memory. You also cannot use kind. How would you describe that person? Start speaking. Perhaps, she is always willing to give her time or share what she has with other people. She never expects anything in return. Excellent. You just moved beyond naming something and started defining it through behavior. This is an important difference. Strong communication is not built on having every English word available at every second. It is built on being able to work with the language that is available. So check your result. When a word disappeared, did your entire sentence disappear with it? Or did your mind immediately begin searching for another way to communicate the idea? If you kept going, you passed this challenge. But there is another kind of pressure that is much harder to prepare for. So far, you knew what you were expected to talk about. Real conversations are not always that generous. Sometimes someone asks you something you never expected, and suddenly you have to create both the idea and the English at the same time. That is your next test. Chapter 4. The Unexpected Question Test. Now the questions become unpredictable. In many English lessons, you already know the kind of question that is coming. What is your name? Where do you live? What do you do? What are your hobbies? You may have answered those questions so many times that the responses almost feel memorized. This challenge removes that advantage. I am going to ask you questions that you probably have not practiced before. There is no perfect response. Your job is to hear the question, decide what you actually think, and turn that thought into English. Ready? Here is the first one. If you could permanently remove one small inconvenience from your everyday life, what would you choose? Answer now. Maybe you chose traffic, waiting in lines, washing dishes, losing your keys, or something completely different. The choice does not matter. What matters is whether you could create an answer without having a prepared sentence waiting in your memory. Now a follow-up. Why did you choose that instead of something more serious? Respond. That second question changes the direction. You now have to defend your choice rather than simply name it. Next question. Suppose someone gave you enough money to stop working for 1 year, but you were not allowed to travel. How would you spend that year? Start speaking. Do not search for the most impressive answer. Build a real one. Maybe you would learn something, spend time with family, improve your health, start a project, or simply slow down. Now the unexpected follow-up. What part of that lifestyle would become boring after 6 months? Answer immediately. Did you notice the shift? You had just explained what you wanted. Now you have to identify a weakness in your own answer. This forces your English to follow a new thought instead of continuing along an easy path. Let's try another. You wake up tomorrow and discover that everyone can hear one sentence from your thoughts each day. What would change about the way you behave? Speak. Now follow it with this. Would that make people more honest or simply more careful? Choose one and explain why. There is no textbook response available here. You have to form an opinion while you are speaking. One more. Imagine you can become excellent at one skill instantly, but you must give up another skill you already have. What would you gain and what would you sacrifice? Answer. Now I am changing the question. What if someone else had to choose the skill you lose? Would you still accept the offer? Respond. This is the pressure we wanted. Real conversations move. Someone hears your answer and asks about a detail you did not expect. They challenge your reasoning. They introduce a new condition. They ask why, what if, or are you sure? You cannot memorize every possible direction a conversation might take, so evaluate yourself carefully. Were you able to create genuine responses, even when they were simple? Did you remain active when the question suddenly changed? Or did you understand every word but struggle because you had never prepared an answer to that specific question? If you respond, you are beginning to use English as a tool for thinking, not simply as material you have studied. And now we are going to remove another safety net. Until this point, each answer could be relatively short. In the next challenge, starting will not be enough. You will have to keep speaking after the easy ideas are gone, and you will have 60 seconds to prove that you can. Chapter 5. The 60-second speaking test. Now we are going to test something that short answers cannot reveal. You have 60 seconds, one ordinary topic, and one important rule. Once you begin speaking, try not to stop until the minute is finished. You do not need advanced vocabulary. You do not need complicated grammar. You do not need to sound impressive. Your challenge is simply to keep one idea moving into the next. Here is your topic. Describe your ideal day from morning until night. Before you begin, do not prepare the entire answer in your head. Start with the first idea that comes naturally and allow the rest to develop while you speak. Your 60 seconds begin now. Start. You might begin with, my ideal day would start quite early. I would wake up without an alarm and have a quiet breakfast. Good. But do not stop there. What happens next? Where would you go? Who would be with you? What would you do during the afternoon? What would you eat? How would you spend the evening? Keep talking. If one idea finishes, connect it to another. You can say, after that, later in the day. Another thing I would like to do is, or in the evening. These small connecting phrases give your mind enough time to decide where the answer should go next. Keep speaking. You are not trying to deliver a prepared speech. You are building the answer while it is happening. If you make a grammar mistake, continue. If you repeat a simple word, continue. If your sentence comes out differently from the way you wanted, continue. The clock is still moving, and stop. Now think about what happened during that minute. The first 10 or 15 seconds may have felt easy. You probably had an obvious starting point. The real challenge appeared after those first ideas were used. That is the part we are testing. Many learners can answer a question with one sentence. They can say, my ideal day would be relaxing, or I would spend time with my family. But when another 30 or 40 seconds remain, they suddenly have to develop the thought. That requires more than knowing words. You need to add details, explain reasons, give examples, move through time, introduce another point, and connect separate thoughts into one clear response. Let's try a second round, but this time the topic is different. Your topic is, talk about one habit you would like to improve in your life. You have 60 seconds. Begin now. Start by naming the habit, then tell me why you want to change it. Perhaps you want to sleep earlier, exercise regularly, use your phone less, read more, manage your time better, or become more organized. Whatever you choose, develop it. When did you first notice the problem? How does it affect your day? What have you already tried? What makes the habit difficult to change? What would improve if you succeeded? Keep going. Do not answer these questions like a list. Use them as doors. When one thought ends, open another door and continue. For example, if you say, I want to use my phone less, your next thought could explain when you use it too much. Then you could describe why that bothers you. From there, you might talk about what you could do instead. One idea naturally creates another. That is how longer speaking becomes manageable. And stop. Now evaluate the second round. Did you spend part of the minutes silently searching for the next idea? Did you restart sentences several times because you wanted them to sound perfect? Or were you able to keep producing understandable English even when the words were simple? There is another detail to notice. Were your sentences connected? Compare these two speaking patterns. I want to exercise. Exercise is healthy. I am busy. I like walking. Morning is good. The meaning is understandable, but every thought stands alone. Now consider this. I want to exercise more regularly because I spend too much time sitting during the day. I think walking in the morning would be realistic for me because I usually have some free time before work. If I could make that part of my routine, I would probably have more energy. The vocabulary is still simple, but the ideas support each other. One sentence gives a reason for the previous sentence and creates a direction for the next one. That connection is what you should aim for. Let's do one final mini test. This time, I will not give you questions to help you. Your topic is a decision you are happy you made. Start speaking. Explain the decision in your own way. Decide what information matters and what should come next. If your mind becomes empty, do not panic. Return to something you already said and expand it. Explain why it mattered. Describe what happened before it. Tell what changed afterward. Compare your life before and after. There is almost always another direction available. And stop. Now you have a much clearer picture of your speaking endurance. If you could speak for most of the minute while keeping your message understandable, you handled this stage well. If you repeatedly ran out of things to say after a few sentences, you have identified a specific skill that needs practice, developing ideas while speaking. But the next challenge changes the process completely. Until now, the idea began inside your own mind. You decided what you wanted to say and then expressed it. Next, you will receive information from someone else first. You will have to understand it, hold on to the important meaning, and respond before it disappears. That is where listening and speaking finally collide. Chapter 6. The Listening to Response Challenge. Now we are going to connect two abilities that learners often practice separately: listening and speaking. In this challenge, you will hear a short piece of information only once. Immediately afterward, I will ask you to do something with it. You may need to answer a question, summarize what you heard, give your reaction, or continue the idea. Do not write anything down. Do not go back. Listen carefully and respond with the information you understand. Here is the first one. Daniel usually drives to work, but this morning his car would not start. He called a taxi because he had an important meeting at 9. Now answer. Why did Daniel take a taxi? Speak. The answer is simple. His car would not start, and he needed to get to an important meeting. If you understood the information but needed several seconds to organize your response, notice that. This challenge is not only about recognizing meaning. You must take meaning from what you hear and quickly turn it into your own spoken English. Let's make it slightly harder. Listen. Maria planned to spend Saturday at home, but her sister called in the morning and invited her to a small family gathering. Maria had work to finish, so she stayed home until the afternoon and joined everyone later. Now summarize what happened in 1 or 2 sentences. Go. You might say, Maria originally wanted to stay home because she had work to finish. She completed some of it and went to the family gathering later. You did not need to repeat every word. You needed to identify the important events and rebuild them clearly. Next round. Listen carefully. I started taking the bus instead of driving because parking near my office became expensive. At first, I thought the bus would be inconvenient, but now I actually enjoy having 20 minutes to read before work. Here is your question. Did this person's opinion about taking the bus change? Explain how. Respond now. A strong answer could be yes. At first, the person expected the bus to be inconvenient, but later started enjoying the journey because it provided time to read. Now we change the task. Instead of telling me what you heard, I want you to react to it. Listen. My friend received a job offer with a much higher salary, but the new position would require her to move far away from her family. She has only 3 days to make a decision. What advice would you give her? Speak. There is no single correct answer here. Maybe you would tell her to accept the opportunity. Maybe staying close to family matters more to you. You might suggest comparing the long-term benefits before deciding. The important point is that your response must connect to what you just heard. You are not answering an isolated question. You are entering an idea that another speaker has already started. Let's increase the difficulty again. Listen. Kevin promised himself that he would exercise every morning before work. For the first week, he followed the plan perfectly. During the second week, he missed 2 mornings because he stayed up late. By the third week, he had stopped completely. Do not summarize it. Continue the thought. What do you think Kevin should do next? Answer now. Perhaps he should choose a more realistic schedule. Maybe mornings are not suitable for him. Perhaps he should begin with 3 days a week instead of trying to exercise every day. Whatever you choose, explain your reasoning. Now for a faster round. I will give you information followed immediately by a question. Emma ordered a birthday gift online 2 weeks early, but the company sent the wrong item. Her friend's birthday is tomorrow. What is Emma's immediate problem? Answer. Next. A cafe near Liam's house is cheaper than his usual cafe, but it is always crowded and difficult to find a seat. Which cafe would you choose and why? Respond. One more. Nora has been learning to cook. Her first few meals were disappointing, but she continued practicing and can now prepare several dishes confidently. What changed between the beginning and now? Speak. Did you notice how each task required a different kind of response? Sometimes you have to remember a fact. Sometimes you have to reduce several details into a short summary. Sometimes you need to form an opinion based on what you heard. And sometimes you have to take an unfinished situation and decide what should happen next. This is much closer to what happens during actual conversation. When another person speaks, you cannot focus only on understanding individual sentences. While listening, you are also identifying what matters, noticing the speaker's intention, remembering important details, and preparing yourself to respond. That transition can be difficult. Some learners understand English very well when they are watching a video or listening quietly. But when someone finishes speaking and suddenly looks at them for an answer, their mind becomes empty. The problem may not be listening itself. The difficulty can appear in the handoff between receiving English and producing it. So check your performance. Could you respond without hearing the information a second time? Could you separate important details from unnecessary ones? When I asked for your opinion, could you use what you heard as the foundation for your answer? If you could, you have crossed an important bridge. But now the challenge changes again. So far, every situation has a clear structure created for you. You listened and responded to information that was already organized. Next, I will give you only the beginning. From there, you will have to create the people, events, connections, and ending yourself. And once the story starts moving, you will have to keep it together. Chapter 7. The Story Building Pressure Test. Now you are going to build something instead of simply answering. I will give you the beginning of a situation. Your job is to continue the story in English. But there is a catch. While you are speaking, I will introduce new information that you must include without destroying what you have already created. You cannot plan the ending in advance because you do not know what is coming. Ready? Here is your opening. Alex was walking home one evening when he noticed a small envelope on the ground. Continue the story. What does Alex do? Speak now. Maybe Alex picks it up. Perhaps he ignores it at first and then changes his mind. You decide. Keep your story moving. Now here is your first new detail. The envelope has Alex's name written on it. Add that information and continue. You say, Alex was surprised because he had never seen the envelope before. He looked around, but there was nobody nearby. After a few seconds, he decided to open it. Good. Now something changes. Inside the envelope, there is no letter. There is only a photograph of a place Alex recognizes. Continue. What place is it? Why does Alex recognize it? Why would someone send him this photograph? You do not need an extraordinary explanation. You simply need one that makes sense with the story you have already created. Keep going. Now another detail arrives. The photograph was taken that same morning. Adapt your story. If you previously said the photograph showed Alex's childhood home, perhaps someone visited it that morning. If you said it showed his office, maybe the photograph contains something he did not notice earlier. Your task is to connect the new information rather than abandon everything and begin again. That is where the pressure comes from. When you tell a story naturally, several parts of your English have to cooperate. You need to remember what already happened, keep the timeline understandable, describe actions, introduce reasons, and decide what happens next. Now let's start a completely different story. Listen carefully. Sophie arrived at a restaurant to meet an old friend she had not seen for 5 years. She was 20 minutes early. Continue. What does she do while she waits? How does she feel about seeing this person again? Speak. Now add this. A waiter approaches Sophie and tells her that someone has already paid for her meal. Continue the story. Who could have paid? Does Sophie think it was her friend? What does she ask the waiter? Keep going. New detail. Her friend sends a message saying, I'm sorry, I can't come tonight. Do not restart. Work with what you already have. Sophie becomes confused because she assumed her friend had paid. Maybe she asks the waiter who made the payment. Maybe the situation turns out to have a simple explanation. Choose a direction and continue. Now the final detail. The person who paid is sitting somewhere else in the restaurant. Finish the story. There is no correct ending. Your ending could be funny, surprising, emotional, or completely ordinary. What matters is whether it connects logically to everything that came before. Now think about your English during that exercise. Did you keep the same tense, or did you move randomly between past and present? If you said Sophie arrived at the restaurant, then continued with, she sits down and ordered a drink, your timeline became unstable. A more consistent version would be, she sat down and ordered a drink. Do not become obsessed with every grammar mistake, but notice whether your story remains easy to follow. There is another challenge hiding inside this test: memory. Suppose you introduced a brother at the beginning, said he lived in another city, and then later described him as someone who was standing outside the restaurant the entire time. That could confuse the listener unless you explain how he got there. Every new sentence becomes part of the world you are creating. Later sentences need to respect that world. Let's do one final rapid test. Your opening is: Ryan opened his front door and immediately realized that something inside the house was different. Continue. Now add: nothing has been stolen. Keep going. Next, there is music playing somewhere upstairs. Continue. And finally, Ryan lives alone. Finish the story. How did you handle the changes? If each new detail caused you to stop completely, you may be trying to design the entire sentence before allowing yourself to speak. Storytelling does not give you that luxury. You often discover the next sentence only after the current one has already begun. The strongest performance here is not the most creative story. It is the story that remains understandable while new information keeps changing its direction. If you could adapt, maintain the timeline, and reach an ending without abandoning your original story, you passed an important test of flexible speaking. But there is still one problem we have not tested directly. What happens when your English actually breaks? Not when the question is difficult, not when the story changes. What happens when you make a mistake halfway through a sentence, forget what you were saying, or suddenly lose the word you need? Do you stop, or can you repair the moment and continue? That is exactly what the next challenge will reveal. Chapter 8: The English Recovery Test. Now we are going to test what happens after something goes wrong. This time, success does not mean speaking without mistakes. In fact, mistakes are part of the challenge. Your job is to recover from them without allowing the conversation to collapse. Let's begin. Imagine you are telling someone about your weekend. You start: on Saturday, I went to this new place near my house. It was a, and suddenly the word disappears. What do? Do not stay silent while searching for it. Keep communicating. You could say, I can't remember the word, but it's a place where you can buy bread, cakes, and pastries. The word you wanted was bakery, but you did not need it to finish your thought. That is your first recovery. Now try a different problem. You are explaining something and say, my sister has lived in London for 3 years. You immediately realize something sounds wrong. Keep going. You might correct yourself naturally. Sorry, she has lived there for 3 years. Then continue with your story. The important part is what happens after the correction. You do not need to apologize for 10 seconds, explain your grammar mistake, or restart the entire conversation. Fix what needs fixing and move forward. Now let's create another kind of breakdown. You begin answering this question: why did you choose your current job? You say, I chose it because when I was younger. Actually, that's not the main reason. Now what? Your original sentence has lost its direction. Recover. You could say, let me put it another way. The main reason was that I wanted more independence. That small phrase gives you a new starting point. Try using expressions like, let me say that differently. What I mean is, actually, a better way to explain it is, the main point is, these are not signs that your English has failed. They are tools that help you manage your own speech while it is happening. Now we will test a more uncomfortable situation. You are describing a person. My manager is very. You know exactly what you mean, but the adjective will not come. You could freeze and wait for the missing word, or you could describe the behavior. She always checks every small detail and wants everything done exactly according to the plan. Maybe the word you wanted was strict, careful, or demanding. It does not matter. The listener can still understand the person you are describing. Next challenge. You are halfway through a long sentence. I think working from home is useful because people can save time traveling to work, and nothing comes. Do not abandon the answer. Finish the sentence in a simpler way, and they can have more control over their day. Then start a fresh sentence. You do not have to rescue every complicated sentence exactly as you originally planned it. Sometimes the best recovery is to simplify. Let's make this more realistic. Imagine someone asks, "What did you think of the event yesterday?" You begin, "I thought it was boring," but immediately you realize that boring is not exactly what you mean. Change your answer while speaking. You might say, "Actually, boring is probably the wrong word. It was interesting in some parts, but it lasted much longer than I expected." That is a successful recovery because you did more than correct vocabulary. You adjusted your meaning. Now here is another situation. You have been explaining something for 30 seconds and suddenly you forget the original question. This happens even in your first language. Instead of panicking, you can say, "Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second." Then return to the last clear point. "Anyway, what I was saying was that changing my routine helped me manage my mornings better." You found the road again. Now it is your turn. I want you to speak for 30 seconds about something you recently learned. Begin now. While you speak, deliberately change one sentence halfway through. Correct one thing. Replace one word. If possible, stop yourself once and restart the idea differently. Do it intentionally. This may feel strange, but it teaches you something important. A broken sentence does not have to become a broken conversation. And stop. Now evaluate what happened. Did every small problem feel like an emergency? When you noticed a mistake, did your attention become trapped inside it? Did you forget the larger message because you were trying to repair one sentence perfectly? Or could you make a quick adjustment and continue? Real speech is full of repairs. People begin sentences and change direction. They choose a word and replace it. They forget names, they lose their thoughts. They clarify what they meant. They sometimes start explaining one thing and realize another explanation would be better. The difference is that experienced speakers do not treat these moments as the end of communication. They recover. That is what this test measures. Your English does not need to remain perfect under pressure. It needs to remain functional. If you can forget a word and describe it, correct a mistake without losing momentum, simplify a sentence that becomes too difficult, or return to your point after losing your direction, then your speaking has something extremely valuable: resilience. And you are going to need that resilience immediately, because the next challenge will not isolate one skill at a time. There will be questions, reactions, follow-ups, clarification, disagreement, and sudden changes of direction. In other words, the safety of the individual tests is over. Now we enter the conversation. Chapter 9. The real conversation simulation. Now everything comes together. Until this point, each challenge focused on one specific ability. You responded quickly, rephrased ideas, worked around missing words, handled unexpected questions, spoke for longer periods, reacted to what you heard, built stories, and recovered when your English became unstable. Now you have to use all of those skills inside one conversation. There is no fixed script. The topic can change. The other person can interrupt. You may need to clarify what you mean, defend an opinion, ask a question, or adjust your answer without warning. Let's begin. Imagine you have just met someone at a small social event. They ask, "So, what do you usually do on weekends?" Answer naturally. Do not give a perfect speech. Just respond as you would in a real conversation. Maybe you say, "I usually stay home for part of the weekend, but I also like going out with friends." Good. Now the person follows up. What do you usually do when you go out? Answer. You might mention eating somewhere, walking, shopping, visiting family, or simply spending time together. Now the conversation shifts slightly. The person says, "I actually prefer staying home. I think going out every weekend is exhausting. Do you agree?" Respond. You do not need to copy their opinion. You can say, "I understand that, but for me, going out helps me relax." Or, "I agree, sometimes staying home is much better." Now they interrupt. Wait, when you say going out helps you relax, what exactly do you mean? Clarify your idea. This is where many learners suddenly feel pressure. You already gave an answer, but now someone wants you to explain it more clearly. Perhaps you say, "I mean that changing my environment helps me forget about work for a while." Good. Now the person asks, "What if all your friends were busy? Would you still go somewhere alone?" Answer immediately. Notice how the conversation is no longer following a predictable pattern. You are moving from personal habits to preferences, then to explanation, and now to a hypothetical situation. Keep going. The person says, I could never eat alone at a restaurant. I would feel uncomfortable. How would you respond? Maybe you agree. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you have never tried it. Say what you actually think. Now imagine they misunderstand you. You say, I don't mind being alone sometimes. They reply, so you don't like spending time with people. Correct the misunderstanding. You could say, no, that's not what I mean. I enjoy being with people, but I also like having some time by myself. That clarification matters. Real conversations often require you to repair meaning, not just grammar. Now the topic changes. The person asks, by the way, have you ever traveled somewhere completely alone? Answer, if yes, explain briefly. If not, say whether you would like to. Now the follow-up. What would be the hardest part of traveling alone? Respond. Maybe it would be making decisions, feeling lonely, managing problems, communicating in unfamiliar places, or staying organized. Now the person disagrees with you. They say, I think traveling alone is actually easier because you can do whatever you want. How would you reply without becoming defensive? You could say, that's true in some ways, but I think having someone with you can make difficult situations easier. That is a natural exchange. You acknowledged their point and added your own. Now let's introduce an interruption. You are explaining why you would like to visit another country when the person suddenly asks, sorry, what did you say the name of that city was? Answer the question, then return to your original point. This sounds simple, but it requires control. You have to briefly leave your idea, respond to the interruption, and then remember where you were. You might say, I said Kyoto. Anyway, the reason I would like to go there is. That small phrase brings the conversation back on track. Now one more shift. The person asks, what is one thing people often misunderstand about your country? Take a moment, then answer. This question may require more thought. You might need to explain a cultural habit, a stereotype, a social custom, or something about everyday life. Now imagine they asks, can you give me an example? Add one. Then they say, oh, I thought the opposite was true. How would you respond? Perhaps. Many people think that, but in everyday life it is usually more complicated. Then explain. You are now doing several things at once. You are listening, thinking, choosing language, remembering earlier information, adjusting to the other person's reactions, and deciding what to say next. That is what real conversation feels like. It is rarely one clean question followed by one clean answer. Sometimes the other person changes the subject before you finish. Sometimes they ask you to explain something you assumed was obvious. Sometimes they misunderstand you. Sometimes they disagree. Sometimes you need to ask them a question so the conversation does not become an interview. So let's test that too. You have been answering for several minutes. Now it is your turn to keep the conversation balanced. Ask the other person something connected to what you were discussing. For example, what about you? Have you ever traveled alone? Or, what do you usually do when you need a break from work? Now imagine they answer, I usually go hiking, but I haven't had much time for it recently. Do not simply say, oh nice, ask for a meaningful follow-up. Maybe, why haven't you had much time lately? That keeps the conversation alive. Now evaluate yourself. Could you respond when the subject changed? Could you clarify your meaning when someone misunderstood you? Could you disagree without losing your words? Could you return to your original thought after an interruption? Could you ask a question instead of waiting for the other person to carry the entire conversation? If you manage most of those situations, you have done something much more important than producing correct sentences. You participated, and participation is where spoken English becomes real. But there is still one final challenge. This time, there will be no separate practice rounds and no warning about which skill you need next. You will have to listen, respond, explain, adapt, recover, and continue as one continuous performance. Everything you have done so far leads to this. The final 1% test begins next. Chapter 10. The 1% Fluency Test. This is the final challenge. No preparation, no practice round, no time to build perfect answers in your head. Everything you have tested separately now comes together in one continuous fluency test. You will need to listen carefully, respond quickly, explain your ideas, change direction, rephrase when necessary, and recover if something goes wrong. Do not pause the video. Do not write your answers first. Speak out loud. Ready? Here is your first question. What is one decision you made in the past year that changed something important in your life? You have 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Answer now. Keep going for at least 20 seconds. Explain what the decision was, why you made it, and what changed afterward. Now I am changing the question. If you could go back and make that decision again, would you do anything differently? Respond immediately. Do not repeat your first answer. Add a new thought. Now say the same idea again without using the word different. Go. You might say, I would probably make a few changes, or I would handle some parts another way. Good. Now listen carefully to this short situation. James has worked at the same company for 6 years. He likes the people he works with and feels comfortable there, but recently he received an offer from another company. The new job pays more and offers better opportunities, but he would have to move to another city. Do not replay it. Here is your question. What is the main decision James has to make? Answer. Now give him advice. Would you tell him to stay or leave? Choose one. Explain your reason. Now imagine I disagree with you. I say, but money and career growth are not everything. What if he moves and becomes unhappy? Respond to me. You do not have to change your opinion, but you must react to the new point. You say, that is possible, but he could learn more about the new city and company before deciding. Good. Now I am going to remove one word. Continue discussing James, but you are not allowed to use the word job. Speak for 15 seconds. You might say position, work, career opportunity, or describe the situation without naming it directly. Keep going. Now stop. New topic. Imagine someone asks, what makes a person trustworthy? Answer immediately. Give at least 2 qualities. Now give an example. Do not use a famous person. Create a simple real-life situation. For example, you might describe a friend who keeps promises or someone who tells the truth even when it is difficult. Now I interrupt you. Wait, are you saying trustworthy people never make mistakes? Clarify your meaning. Go. A strong response might be, no, that's not what I mean. Everyone makes mistakes. I mean that trustworthy people are honest about them and take responsibility. Notice what just happened. You did not only answer a question, you had to protect your meaning when someone challenged your wording. Now we move again. Your next task is storytelling. Here is the beginning. Anna was waiting for a train when she realized someone had left a small bag beside her. Continue the story. Speak for 20 seconds. Now add this new detail. The bag contains something valuable. Adapt. Keep the story logical. Now another detail. The train arrives, but Anna has only a few seconds to decide what to do. Finish the story. Do not search for the most creative ending. Make the events clear. Now we test recovery. Start this sentence. I think learning a new language becomes easier when, finish it. Now deliberately change your idea halfway through. You could say, I think learning a new language becomes easier when you study every day. Actually, let me say that differently. I think consistency matters more than studying for many hours at once. Continue. That correction was part of the test. Now for your final speaking round. You have 60 seconds. Your topic is, what does a good life mean to you? Start now. Do not create a list of disconnected words. Build your answer. You might talk about relationships, freedom, health, meaningful work, peace, learning, time, or something completely different. Explain why your choices matter. If one idea finishes, move naturally to another. If you forget a word, describe it. If you make a mistake, repair it quickly. If your sentence becomes too complicated, simplify it. Keep speaking. You are halfway through. Do not stop. Add an example. Challenge one of your own ideas. Explain what you think people sometimes misunderstand about having a good life. Keep going and stop. Now it is time to score yourself. Give yourself 1 point for each statement that is true. 1. You could begin most answers within about 3 seconds. 2. You could express the same idea in more than one way. 3. When a word disappeared, you could explain the meaning instead of stopping completely. 4. You could respond to questions you had not prepared for. 5. You could speak for close to a minute without long periods of silence. 6. You could understand short-spoken information and use it in your response. 7. You could build a story while adapting to new details. 8. You could correct mistakes or change direction without losing the entire conversation. 9. You could handle disagreement, clarification, interruptions, and follow-up questions. 10. During this final test, you could combine several of these abilities without relying on translation for every sentence. Now count your points. If you scored between 1 and 3, your English knowledge may be stronger than your ability to use it under pressure. That is useful information because now you know what needs to become more automatic. If you scored between 4 and 6, you already have a working speaking system. You can communicate, but certain situations still slow you down. If you scored between 7 and 8, your English is becoming flexible. You can handle many real situations without depending heavily on prepared language. If you scored 9 or 10, you performed extremely well across a wide range of speaking conditions. But remember what this score actually means. This was not an exam about difficult vocabulary, perfect pronunciation, or complicated grammar. It tested whether your English stays available when conditions become unpredictable. Can you start without preparing? Can you keep going when the perfect word disappears? Can you understand someone and respond instead of only listening? Can you change direction when the conversation changes? Can you repair your own speech without giving up? That is the difference between knowing English and being able to use English when the moment demands it. So do not judge yourself only by the final number. Look at the individual challenges where you struggled. Those are not failures, they are a map. And if you take this same test again after more practice, the most important change may not be that your vocabulary becomes larger. It may be that the silence between understanding English and speaking it becomes smaller. That is when fluency begins to feel real. So, are you really in the 1%? Your score matters, but something else matters even more. You now know exactly what happens when English puts you under pressure. Every hesitation showed you where more practice is needed. Every answer you produced naturally showed you what is already becoming automatic. And if you struggled with some of these challenges, don't simply watch this test once and forget it. Come back, take it again, and notice what changes when your brain no longer knows what is coming. That is how progress becomes visible. Write your score in the comments and see how you compare with other learners. And remember, the goal isn't perfect English. It's English that keeps moving when you need it most.